Welcome to an AAHRPP educational session on applying for accreditation. AAHRPP offers a day-long workshop at our annual conference on how to apply for accreditation. In 2020, because of the COVID-19 public health emergency, we are providing this pre-conference workshop through a series of videos. In recognition of these unusual circumstances, we are providing these videos free as a resource to the community. We are extremely grateful for our presenters from the conference who were excited to move forward and provide education through videos. We thank them all for generously devoting their time and extensive experience. I will now turn it over to Kristen Cron from the University of California, Los Angeles, and to Sue Haddock from the Dorn Research Institute.
Thank you, Robert. In this session, we're going to talk about how to prepare and respond to the Step 1 review and some helpful hints from Step 1 reviewers. Again, I'm Kristen Cron, and I'm the director of the UCLA Office of Human Research Protection Program. I'm also an AAHRPP Council member and site visitor. My co-presenter is Sue Haddock, board chair of the Dorn Research Institute, who is also an AAHRPP site visitor. First, I want to go over parts of the Step 1 application. There are 4 parts. Section A is the application form for accreditation or reaccreditation. The application form contains questions that will help AAHRPP staff customize the review of your application and site visit and provide important information about your site-to-site visitors. Section B is the overview of your Human Research Protection Program. Section B is where AAHRPP wants to see a brief description of your organization and its purpose, and how the Human Research Protection Program relates to your organization's mission, an organizational chart for your organization, an organizational chart for your Human Research Protection Program, indicate the individual who is your organizational official, list the administrative units, for example, the school, centers, division, and branches. If responsibility for your Human Research Protection Program is decentralized, describe all the responsible entities and the relationship to the organizational official, list other organizations that are components of your HRPP, indicate any essential functions of the HRPP that are conducted at other sites or other units, for example, conflict of interest, research pharmacy services, grants and contracts, etc. And if your organization applies ICH-GCP, indicate if all or only portions of the ICH-GCP guidelines are followed, and when applicable, include any other relevant background that will assist AAHRPP staff and site visitors in reviewing your application. For Section C, this is the element by element index to the supporting documents in Section D that allows AAHRPP staff and staff site visitors to locate the information that supports your organization, meeting each AAHRPP element. Section D is your supporting documents, and this is what AAHRPP staff and site visitors use to evaluate your organization. And lastly, Section E includes your IRB rosters. And if your organization has more than one IRB, it's an Excel spreadsheet of each IRB committee roster. AAHRPP also has an online tutorial on how to assemble the Step 1 application. So if you want access to that tutorial, you can reach out to AAHRPP directly to access that video. Now let's move into the actual preparation for the Step 1 submission. The first step is to conduct a self-assessment. And this is a critical introspection into your Human Research Protection Program and evaluation of your program according to the elements of the accreditation standards. This process may look differently depending on the size of the institution and whether or not there are designated staff solely focusing on accreditation. I think a key component to think about is factoring in the adequate amount of time to conduct the self-assessment, given the size, scope, and number of staff and resources you have to prepare for accreditation. So to give you perspective, for our initial accreditation, we started with the self-assessment 2 years prior to our goal of submitting for accreditation, and then subsequently started the self-assessment process about 1.5 years before we were to submit for reaccreditation. We had a very large program and did not have designated staff to solely focus on accreditation. So what we did is we created a subcommittee that met twice a month to review policy and validate if what we say in policy was what we were actually doing in practice. Another critical factor for us was having the right people involved in the subcommittee. You really need key players that not only know regulation and policy, but who are also involved in the day-to-day IRB submission review and approval process, as well as individuals who are involved with conflict of interest, grants and contracts, compliance, your QA/QI team, radiation safety, biosafety, pharmacy, etc. They provide insight into policy and can validate what's actually happening in practice. And keep in mind the self-assessment is a process where you really learn and understand how your program works or doesn't work, and gives you an opportunity for reflection and change. Some questions to think about as you're going through the self-assessment include asking yourselves, do we have the required written materials? Does our practice follow what's in our written materials? Do our activities actually achieve the outcomes we want? Preparing the Step 1 application, you want to collect supporting documents per element, which include your human subjects application, your reviewer checklists, your consent templates, your org charts, and your template approval letters. The policies and procedures and supporting documents are what verifies the organization follows in practice. The list of supporting documents, which is the element by element index, becomes section C, and copies of the supporting documents become section D of the application. So in this slide, here's an example of how you can format your element by element index for section C. In this example, we're using element 11C. Then you provide a list of materials that document how your organization meets that element. The documents that are included here should align with what is in section D. And ideally, when you were organizing your element by element index, you would make your Step 1 reviewer very happy if you hyperlinked directly to that document. So you'll see how we have the document bolded in this example. If a Step 1 reviewer was to click on that, it would directly link them to that specific document within section D. Now you have completed the self-assessment and have steps A through E organized. Now you're ready to submit Step 1. Step 1 is comprised of a single PDF with 4 sections and an Excel spreadsheet of your IRB rosters. Once completed and submitted, the application is reviewed by AAHRPP staff and assigned to a Step 1 reviewer. There may be questions and clarifications that the Step 1 reviewer will direct towards the organizational contact. And then once those have been addressed within 60 calendar days, AAHRPP will send a Step 1 review of the application materials to the organization. I want to highlight some common Step 1 application errors, so hopefully you can avoid them when preparing your Step 1. For Section A, the legal name of the organization doesn't always match AAHRPP records. The oversight of the other organizations box, which is the components box, is left blank. The number of active protocols do not add up. Organizations do not provide a numerical answer for question 5 when asking the number of IRBs or ethics committees. For Section B, organizations often forget to include the org chart for the organization and the Human Research Protection Program. For Section C, bookmarking the element by element index by each domain standard, and the element is a frequent formatting error. For Section D, the bookmarks in Section D don't match the same document number in Section C. And for Section E, IRB roster isn't submitted as a separate Excel spreadsheet. And again, that is an Excel spreadsheet for each IRB committee roster. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Sue Haddock, and she's going to talk about the Step 1 response.
Thank you, Kristen. So you've spent all that time, you've prepared your Step 1, you've submitted it, and you've waited to hear the response back. And the day comes when you get that response. You open it up, whether it's an email or an actual written response, and you look at it and you say, oh my. Well, you might feel irritation because you've got some things there that you've obviously missed. Or you might feel irritation that, how could those reviewers have seen this in my application? I really intended it to portray that. And so there may be some irritation. Or you may feel disbelief that how could they have found this number of items incorrect or still lacking something? There might be confusion. There might be questions that have been asked of you that you will say, I'm not sure I understand what they're asking for at this point. And then sometimes there's just plain acknowledgement. Yeah, we forgot to send in that particular policy, or we missed that part of it. And then for some, there's relief. Whew, we got through it and we didn't have very many items at all that we have to respond to, or in some cases, perhaps none. So once you have your response, there are a few actions that you need to take. You need to sit down, read the report, and make sure you understand what's being said in that report. Don't be defensive about it. Don't try to defend what you've done at this point. Try to understand what the reviewer is saying and what they may have seen or not seen in your step one. If they have questions, and sometimes there might be questions about a particular, say, the number of components that you have, or it might be some questions about a particular policy. Answer those questions with the requested information. Just be very straightforward about what the responses are. Once in a while, there might be an error in terms of some of what the step one has sent back to you. And so what you want to do is make sure that you correct those errors very respectfully, but just let them know that that's not what was in the actual report. And then if you don't understand something that they're asking of you, or how they didn't see what you thought was there, be sure to seek clarification. You can respond to the step one reviewer and ask those questions, or to the AAHRPP staff as well. So determine what changes or additions are needed, and then work with your team to make sure you have the policy changes that are necessary. It's really important that you do work with a team to put together all the changes that might be necessary as you go forward with getting ready for the responses. So once you've prepared your response, you've done your work with your team, you've changed policies, you've added things, you've deleted things, whatever is necessary to correct what is necessary for the step one response. Then you'll want to send that response. Make sure you send one response per element per email. So don't try to double up on them, just have one element per email. And be sure to respond to the step one reviewer as well as the AAHRPP response box. You need to do both of them. In your subject line, you need to make sure you've identified the specific element number that you are addressing with that particular email. And then good practice is to include a brief narrative explaining what you are sending. That helps the reviewer understand that you're responding to this particular item, you've got this particular response, and you might even want to indicate where the change is to be found if you're making changes to a policy that you are then attaching. That helps the reviewer really focus on what your changes have been. So highlighting those changes, identifying where they can be found in the document is really important. So some of the things that we see in terms of the errors on the step one response. Sometimes the email comes in and has several elements, and trying to sort through all of those might result in some additional errors. So be sure that you have just one element per email. Make sure that the subject line identifies the element. Sometimes we see that it doesn't. And so once again, you're adding confusion to the responses by not being clear about what elements you're putting in place. And then we always see that the reviewer is not copied. So it goes to the response box, but the reviewer doesn't get it. And so sometimes that will then cause some delay in your response being reviewed, because AAHRPP staff monitors that, but they may not immediately notice that the reviewer was not there, copied on your response. And so it may take a little longer to get the response then to the reviewer. So make sure that both the reviewer and the response box are included in your response to them. Of course, we've all sent emails intending to send that attachment along with them and realized after you've hit send, oh, I forgot the attachment. No problem. Just go back and re-email it and attach the attachment. But that's one of the errors that we do see. And then sometimes we mix them up as we respond. So the response is for element 1A5 and the attachment is really for 1A5 or 15B. So make sure that those things match. So here's a sample response so that you'll know exactly what we're talking about. You see in the to line, there's a step 1 reviewer, the name of the individual who was identified as your step 1 reviewer. And then in your CC, you want the AAHRPP response box. In the subject line, this one is responding to element 15B. And so in your email about element 15B, you would say, Dear Step 1 Reviewer. If you were responding to me, you would say, Dear Dr. Haddock, please see the attached policy that has been changed to add the required information. The changes can be found on page 3 of the policy and are highlighted for your convenience. If you have questions, please let me know. Thank you. Give your name, and then make sure you've got the sample policy attached. So in terms of some of our recommendations, because Kristen and I have both done any number of step 1 reviews, we have found that more is not necessarily better. If one policy addresses the element completely, put in one policy. You don't have to put in every policy that has some mention of that element in it. If it's covered in one, that is sufficient. Be sure that when you're preparing your response, you do talk to each other. And Kristen talked about this in terms of your team putting together your step 1. Make sure there's integration and communication between all the players. Make sure that they have understanding of what the changes are in terms of your changes in policy so that all parts can come together. And then, as Kristen also mentioned, the overall organization of the application can be very critical to how the reviewer sees it and responds to it. So those hyperlinks and those bookmarks are very helpful. The overall formatting and the appearance do make a difference. If it's easy for the reviewer to find the various documents and the evidence to support your elements, it makes it a whole lot easier and less confusing to the reviewer. It also makes the reviewer less irritated at having to spend so much time trying to find these things. So it's really to your benefit to make sure that it's in good format and appears easy to review. So that concludes the information that we have for you today. Thank you, and good luck on your step 1s.
Thank you to Kristen and Sue. We really appreciate your excellent support for human participant protections and AAHRPP during this difficult time. This concludes this presentation, but please check our website for other videos in our pre-conference series on applying for accreditation.